the Ecdysozoa, the superphylum, the second superphylum in the group of protostomes, the bilaterally symmetrical animals that form the mouth first, that comes from the first opening of the blastopore. These guys are another large group of species that share many similarities. And here, probably the most important ones are that they have the sequence of the 18S ribosomal RNA similarities. They all lack spiral cleavage. They are protostomes, but they cleave their cells with radial cleavage, but they have determinate development. And so they're different, but these are the other part of the protozomes, the ecdysozoa, and their key characteristic is they have a cuticle that must be molted, and then they also lack cilia for locomotion. So they're different from the Lophotrochozoa. There are two great groups here. The first is the roundworms, Phylum Nematoda. There are 20,000 known species and many, many more other species that are being described all the time. They are found in all habitats, all types of fresh water and marine waters. They are found in soil. They are found in deep underground habitats, and many, many are parasitic. They have an unusual body cavity called the pseudocoelom. It has a fluid-filled chamber that acts as a water-filled hydroskeleton. They have a complete gut and well-developed reproductive system and longitudinal muscles. They move differently from the segmented worms, which can push something forward, push their bodies forward and make themselves skinny in some places and fat in others. These guys can just lash back and forth. When you look at them, many of them look the same. They are bilaterally symmetrical and unsegmented. They are covered by this thick cuticle that must be molted as they grow, and they usually go through 5 larval stages. They have this well-developed digestive system with stylets at their anterior end and a very strong muscular pharynx that allows them to suck materials in, and then a subterminal anus. If you look at them in cross-section, they have a very thin layer. You can see their digestive system is in pink, and then it's the pseudocoelom, and then there's again a layer of muscular cells that are made by mesoderm, and then the cuticle on the outside. They have nerve cords, dorsal and ventral nerve cords. They have excretory duct. A fairly simple cross section. And here you have separate sexes. You have males and females, and usually the males are smaller than the female and they have a hooked end. Females can be quite large, and they are often filled with mostly female reproductive organs and lots of eggs. They have internal fertilization and the kind of direct development within the egg, and so that the first larva looks like a small adult. And so they don't go through a free-swimming larva or anything like that. They have very determinate development, which means the cells have a fate that's determined quite early. And in fact, adults have a fixed number of cells. This is called eutely. And in some of the species, we know exactly how many cells they have because they've been well studied. And so there's a species called Xenorhabditis elegans that's used in research, and it has exactly 959 cells. You don't have to know exactly that, but they have this eutely, which is unusual. For us, we won't have to know very many of them. There are about 50 species of these that cause human disease. Hookworms are one of the most common one. It's an intestinal parasite that sucks blood in the intestine, produces anemia. You get them by walking barefoot in places where the larvae have been deposited. Another one you may have heard of is trichinella, causes trichinosis. You get it from eating undercooked meat, particularly pork, and they insist in the muscles. cause a lot of problems. Um, Another one you may have heard of that probably is much closer to home is Enterobius formicularis. No one says that. It's called the human pinworm. Um, the adult worms live in the human intestine, and the females fill up with eggs, and when the eggs are ready to hatch, the female migrates out the large intestine, emerging from the anus and onto the fold of the skins around the anus, and then she dies. And then when she ruptures, the eggs are deposited on that fold, and they cause itching. And the eggs are mature, and they're very, very small. They pass right through clothing, and when people itch, then they get those eggs on their hands, and then the eggs wind up on food and are ingested. Uh, this is typically a problem that children go through in places like daycares and things like that, where if you see kids scratching their behind incessantly, this is usually what's going on. They have these eggs deposited there, most often self-limiting, but can be treated with drugs if need be. Um, most nematode-caused human diseases are treated and are not a big problem anymore in developed countries where we have access to clean water and safe food. These are a much bigger problem for veterinary concerns. If you're a veterinarian, you'll come to know roundworms quite well. They form some significant health challenges to wild and domestic animals. One I've worked on is Paralaphostrongylis tenuis. Its brainworm causes disorder in the ungulates and wild and domesticated deer or deer relatives. So in white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, moose, reindeer, the larvae wind up in terrestrial snails that are accidentally ingested when the animals are browsing. And then the adults wind up in the meninges of the brain, where they can do quite a bit of damage. And so these were something that can be checked for by looking at the fecal matter of deer for the eggs and larvae, but can cause problems for llamas and horses and things like that too. Another probably more common one that's a health concern is Toxocara canis. It's a roundworm of dogs that can cause problems for dogs. The larvae mature to adults in the intestine, and they wind up depositing eggs in the feces, or if the dog has a high infection, sometimes the larvae will migrate to other organs, and then pregnant dogs can pass the larvae to their pups. And the pups can actually cause severe problems for the pups. And again, here it shows the eggs being embryonated. So these are a problem, and if again, they can be treated though. If you recognize they're a problem, it's a reason for cleaning dog waste up and not allowing dog waste to accumulate in any place, because the eggs are carried in the waste. And of course, there's roundworms not only in dogs but in cats. Raccoons have problematic roundworms, so it's a significant issue. Okay, so in summary, nematodes have a 3-layered cuticle like all ecdysozoa that must be molted. They have very determinate development and utility as adults, and a hydrostatic skeleton that serves or is the pseudocoelom. They're small but very, very abundant and can be important in many habitats and as parasites.